That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about Tina, the latest documentary from directors Dan Lindsay and T.J. Martin, who won an Oscar for their 2012 documentary LA 92, which will premiere on HBO Max March 27, 2021. It premiered just several weeks ago as a special screening at the 2021 Berlin International Film Festival. And it is, of course, a documentary about Grammy Award-winning icon and legend Tina Turner.
And it's described as like a celebration of her life.
Yeah, like a rough logline would be the celebration of her career.
So this documentary is broken up into 5 parts, and it basically talks about her childhood and her relationship with Ike Turner, and sort of the tumultuous nature of that. Then her life sort of moving on from that. Mm-hmm. So like once she ends up with 4 children, one from a previous relationship, 2 from Ike from a previous marriage he had,
and 1 with Ike,
and then 1 with Ike. Then her leaving him, her comeback, which is basically referring to her album Private Dancer,
which she refers to as her debut, actually.
Which she refers to as her debut because that's her first solo album. And then just her life after that, but it kind of stops at like 1987.
Well,
which we'll get into.
93.
Sure. Really. Well, yes, 93 with What's Love Got to Do with It. It's most of the talking is, so she's featured in it from an interview that was done in her home in Switzerland in 2019. But the bulk of the audio we hear of her speaking about her life is from a 1981 People magazine interview she gave.
Which was the bombshell.
Which was the bombshell interview where she let everyone know that she was in an abusive relationship. I really like Tina Turner.
Same.
And I read her 1987 book, I, Tina, which was, I guess, co-written by Kurt Loder. And of course, I've seen the 1993 movie, What's Love Got to Do with It. Angela Bassett's in the documentary speaking about Tina Turner's career and what she's meant to her. Oprah is in the documentary. She says a few things.
Yeah.
She's not really talking much. The woman who wrote the Broadway play, Tina Turner, or the Tina Turner story, what's her name?
Katori Hall.
She's in it. And Tina Turner's husband, Erwin Bach, her previous manager, Roger Davies. So it feels very legit because we have all the most important people speaking about this person, mainly herself. So that's lovely that this isn't being released or made after she's passed. I don't know that she's getting all of her flowers in this documentary. Overall, I liked it and I think it's very well done. It's kind of a basic approach.
Sure.
Because we were talking about how, like, since documentaries have become so popular in the last decade or so, they all seem to have like a gimmick. Like, there's some angle to it or some graphic, something that they try to set it apart with. But in this one, it's not necessary because the subject matter is so captivating.
Right. So I think for super fans, there's a lot of access to materials that really hasn't been parsed through as much from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Like there are photographs, there are audio snippets, there are little personal things that I think I'm told are, very specific to this, that they had access to.
So there was nothing that I didn't already know, but yes, the access to some visuals are new and some video footage are new, but primarily the abuse, if a person is familiar with even just the 1993 movie, it's pretty well laid out. She describes like a specific act he did to her involving like a wire clothes hanger that I don't recall being in the book. But other than that, there really isn't anything new after 1993. But then that's kind of where the documentary stops and we don't get a sense of her life after that.
Right, yeah. Which, if you are unfamiliar with her, it suggests you just kind of, stopped working after that. But the 90s were very fruitful for Tina Turner.
So, well, I can just talk about that now. I wish So she talks. So there are two things that she really talks about in this documentary. One, how the trauma she experienced at the hands of her ex-husband, Ike Turner, and the sort of like post-traumatic stress she experienced, constantly having to relive it because every interview, every fan wants to talk about it. So she says, that's why I did the 1981 People magazine interview, hoping that if I gave the people what they wanted to know, they would leave me alone. But that didn't work. So then she did the 1987 book, hoping the same thing. Then she says that the movie hopefully would have been closure.
The nail in the coffin, yeah.
But it wasn't. So I find it interesting that now that she has, this is sort of like her swan song, because she says in the documentary, I want to know, like this is me trying to just bow out gracefully. Mm-hmm. That she chose to focus on the things that, like the fodder, that really seemed to be such a negative component of her career. But then the beauty of that is she really did create a lovely life for herself for the last, almost 30 years. Mm-hmm. And she's kept it private, and that's her business. And I think if you're a fan of hers like I am, really the only thing she has to give us is the art she gave.
Yeah.
And that's it. So I think it's a beautiful body of work that is encapsulated in this documentary, and it seems fitting. I just wish that maybe she would have said, she doesn't brag enough about herself. Like her career, like her touring career, she's one of the most successful touring artists of all time. Mm-hmm. But in the documentary, she just says, my dream was to be a rock star and perform in a stadium. And it's like, well, you did that, honey, hundreds of times over. So I kind of wish that it would have been a little more boastful, but that's not her personality.
I don't think
she comes across as sort of elegant and humble.
Yes. But, I got teary watching this a few times. It is actually very well done and it's very poignant. But, she it's in her statements that she makes, that are often off the cuff. Even one of the first ones was talking about her life, the goodness did not balance the bad. And her talking about, because she met Ike Turner in 57 and she was 17, and how to be a woman in front of the camera was, the models were white. She talks about Doris Day and Loretta Young and someone else, and talks about, well, they were beautiful, I was beautiful. It's like, well, yes, you were and are.
You are, yeah.
But even how she reflects on herself is not of this beautiful kind of wonder that took everybody by storm,
The best part of the documentary is hearing her speak.
Yeah.
And there's, there could be more in my opinion, but that's just because it's so lovely hearing her speak about her life. And she seems so thoughtful and pensive.
It was hard to hear about her mother, I think.
So she talks about how her mother, which is in the book, but she talks about how her mother and father basically abandoned her and her siblings when she was an adolescent, and she had to basically raise herself along with a cousin. But she really doesn't get into great detail about how she was able to manage that. But
it's enough to make sense though about the choices she made, or how she ended up with Ike. She talks about, Ike Turner had is credited with Rocket 88 in 1951, kind of the first recorded rock and roll song, the establishment of this genre staple, and about how he was kind of burned on that, and how she promised him she wouldn't leave him. And I think coming from somebody that has been left and abandoned, those ties run deep. When
she also witnessed her parents fighting.
Yes.
Yeah. I only have a few notes. The first thing I thought of was People magazine used to be such a big deal. Mm-hmm. Their circulation was huge, and now it's this weekly magazine that I actually receive by accident. Mm-hmm. So I do get it every week, and it's so funny to me that I remember being a kid and knowing that People magazine was such a big deal.
Well, they equate it to going viral.
Going viral, being on the cover, yeah.
Which is it's also sad to realize that, in between, she left Ike, and it goes over this period where she was in Vegas, and the 81 story is a sideline article. She's not featured on the cover.
Yeah, no. Because when she attempted to resurrect her career in the early 80s, it was difficult because she was in her late 30s, mm-hmm. and she was this black woman that had a very specific look, and people just were not feeling her. And she felt she was able to perform in Vegas because of her success with Ike Turner, but she wanted more, and it proved to be very difficult. I think the most interesting part of the documentary is her talking about how she was able to make her debut solo album. And meeting Roger Davies and going to, I believe it was London, to record. And they talk about the process of recording What's Love Got to Do with It.
Which she hated. She didn't want to do it.
She hated it, but then the man who wrote the song talks about how they kind of had a dance, or he refers to it as a jog, but like a dance, and they finally figured out like the sweet spot, and obviously it was a huge hit. So that was very interesting. Side note, I think first she talks about Ike Turner and why maybe he was so insecure, like in interviews, was because he wasn't a well-spoken man. And we don't get a lot of him speaking, except there's an interview from like 2000, I think, where he talks about his relationship with her. And it's like, yeah, he is not, he doesn't communicate well. So I can see why he probably, for various reasons, he was abusive, but I can see how he wasn't able to communicate verbally, so he had to physically. It makes sense, but I think Ricky Smiley looks like Ike Turner.
Oh, that's what you were thinking.
Yes.
Yeah, I can see that.
She talks about her sort of practice of Buddhism and how that helped her. It's interesting. She seems very private. So she kind of talks about the chanting and how that helped her with finding clarity, but she doesn't really get into it, which I don't think she needs to. I mean, that's her personal spiritual practice.
I did like the portion of that documentary as well, because they weaved that chanting in with the montage of imagery of her, with all that psychedelic imagery from the period, which I thought worked really well.
Well, and then the capstone of that segment is she is on stage once talking about how men basically are dogs, and that women, now it's their time to be out in these streets and do whatever they want. But the narration over that is her saying like that's when the chanting really started to work. That's when she realized like she's not afraid of Ike anymore, and that he could tell. But then the next story is that very popular scene from What's Love Got to Do with It, where they get into the fight in the limo with her wearing the white suit, and how she had to like run across the freeway to get a hotel room. So it's a little incongruent, because it's like, I had the confidence to stand up to him, and then the next story is like, well, we got into the car and he whipped my ass, but I wasn't scared. But then we go back to the hotel room and I give him a massage and leave, and I was so scared. So, it's a complicated situation.
It is, but I think it's a peaks and valleys thing. Like she had to build up to that, and there were things that had to happen.
Well, yes, that makes sense to me, but I think the construction of the documentary is the audio of her from 2019 in Switzerland. Her recollection of things seems to be not as strong as from 1981.
Well, and she's also probably tired of talking about it.
Of course, and she says she is tired of talking about it, and that it creates like stress for her. But I think having to like weave in different audio bites of her talking about the same thing over and over again,
Sure, but I think that was tasteful.
Yes.
And as a way to, it's like we're making this, capstone to your career, and we have to address these issues. And this was a nice way around having to grill her on all these same subjects again.
Yes. So I do think it's an elegant approach to not make this, icon have to sit here and talk about the same old bullshit. Like, she's clearly gotten over it and had a beautiful life. And I think the beauty of this documentary is that she made the choice to gloss over, like, 30 years.
Yeah, for sure.
Because it's like, those are mine. I earned them. That, like, she seems very much at peace with her life now, which is so wonderful to witness.
Well, actually, yeah, now that you say that, she, because of course, Ike just coined her Tina, because her real name's Anna Mae Bullock, and didn't tell her that. Like, all of a sudden, she's just Tina Turner. And how, when she divorced him, that was the one stipulation, she kept the name, because that was able to... And so... Yeah, the documentary really does leave off like those. I think those are her private years. Those are her private memories. She doesn't want to plunder and go over. And I don't know. I think that's kind of fitting, because for up until she left him, until she established herself, she wasn't in control of her own story, and now she is. So,
my final note was like, just watching this made me think like, why do we feel? Because she talks about this, but it's like, why do we feel the need to reintroduce people to their own trauma? Like.
Especially somebody you don't know.
Especially someone you don't know, but, you know, even when... It's just very interesting how celebrity works. And, you know, there are so few people in the world who are as famous, you know, like at the level of a Tina Turner or a Kim Kardashian. You know what I mean? Like, there are very famous people out there, and there aren't that many. So their experience is very unique, and there's no sort of rule book on how they cope with that life. Some of them do better than others. She's clearly done a fine job pulling out of a dark situation and finding happiness, we hope. It sounds like she has. But yeah, it's just so interesting to see people just... Like, there are many clips of her on interviews where the interviewer is just like, yeah, tell me about getting your ass whooped, basically. And
yeah.
It's like,
what is it that attract women to bad men? And
like, can we talk about my new single?
Yes.
And she even says at one point, someone brings up the fact that, like, oh, did you know Ike was recently arrested for possession of whatever?
That was on press for Mad Max, yeah.
And she goes, you know, honestly, I'd much rather hear that he's doing well. And that was the end. And I thought, you know, what a class act. But also, people are such trash. Even in everyday life, like, people want to share their abuse with you or their stress with you. And it's like, I don't want that baggage. I really don't.
I was ignorant because I grew up with, you know, Tina Turner is an establishment and a household name, and I remember it. So it's funny to really realize that Mountain High River Deep wasn't a hit. The Phil Spector
River Deep Mountain
High, which is, you know, a Tina Turner staple.
But it's explained, which makes sense.
Right, it does, but
like crossed over for black artists, and that was not, you know, and like it has to be popular in the R&B charts first, but it's very interesting because that's probably, I mean, my two favorite Tina Turner songs are "The Best" and "River Deep Mountain High," or her version of that, and yeah, it's so amazing that song was not a hit.
Yeah, River Deep Mountain High. And then, of course, like, since we do gloss over the 90s, I remember very much in 1999 listening to When the Heartache Is Over, over and over again. But if anything, you know, since this was an obvious choice not to, but it's like, I would have loved another hour in this period to have gone over, you know, she does the GoldenEye theme, everything from the 90s.
Yeah, it really does gloss over all of the 90s.
But, or, you know, as a teenager, I was obsessed with Ken Russell, and her debut on film was as the Acid Queen in Tommy. And I remember that seeing her so young. I remember that's the first time seeing her young visually as a teen, and then going back and watching a bunch of videos of the Ike and Tina Turner review. And I always remember thinking, you might as well say everybody's name on that stage if you're going to bring up Ike Turner, because the only one we're really paying attention to is her. It's so. I remember feeling like that was bizarre as a kid. But
what would you give this film?
I think 3.5 out of 5.
I would give it 3.5 out of 5 as well. Anything else?
No.
Bye.
Bye.